Shaka Hislop is the honorary president of Show Racism the Red Card. Of course, he's also a former Newcastle and West Ham goalkeeper. He's now living and working in the United States. I spoke to him yesterday from his home near Boston.
Well, my emotions run the full gamut, in all honesty, Steve, and because it's so multi-layered for me. In one capacity, as honorary president of Show Racism the Red Card, of course, it speaks to the work that we've done for nearly 25 years now, and the efforts we've made towards equality and towards a recognition of human rights, whatever those rights may be. And we've done work not just in the communities and around Black equality, but in the human rights of the LGBTQ community, of asylum seekers, of immigrants, of women, most recently of frontline workers who've had their own human rights tested during the most recent pandemic. But similarly, as a parent of Black kids, and how easy it is for me to see their faces on the front lines, and of those who for instance, in the space of George Floyd and under the knee of law enforcement. And that is been the toughest aspect to all of this for me, to come to terms with how easily it could be any one of my kids or my 12-year-old son. And that for me has caused me the most pain.
What are the conversations that you have with your kids about this then? Those must be very difficult conversations.
They are. And again, these conversations come in a couple of forms. One, in that how we as Black people deal with law enforcement and authority. And it's less a case of recognizing that, maybe we aren't seen as equal in their eyes. But in one sense, it's about life preservation. It's about how you deal with the police if you want to stay alive. And that's sad that I have to have those discussions with my 12-year-old son about how he has to act if he wants to see his 13th birthday. At the same time, we also have to put into perspective the protests that we're seeing today and the popularity of it, and how we're only 4 years removed from Colin Kaepernick taking a knee very similarly in peaceful protest, and how he pretty much lost his career over it. And now the exact same symbolism of taking a knee is what's being used in representing that same fight for human rights today. And how we have a responsibility to be on those front lines, to take up that baton from Colin Kaepernick, and to join in whatever capacity it may be, to lend our voices, lend our support for equal rights. And as much as this is about a Black Lives Matter movement, this is about a human movement. And we have to recognize both of our responsibilities, both as humans, and in particular, in this instance, as Black people.
And I guess one of the other things that must make those conversations particularly difficult is that these are just the latest in a line of generation after generation after generation of the same conversations between fathers and sons, mothers and daughters.
Yes, it is. Last night, I sat and watched the movie Selma, which was just on television here. And we were only 15 years removed from that bridge crossing, and how it was met by the police service and law enforcement at the time. And that was, again, a peaceful protest. A lot of the people who were involved in that are still alive today. A lot of the people who were front and center on both sides of that bridge are alive today and telling those same stories. And that, for me, it's easy to think, well, that was so long ago and we've come so far. But in truth, and as we've seen play out in recent weeks, we haven't. And there's still so much to do. And I was doing an interview yesterday, and I was speaking about starting Show Racism the Red Card and being involved with that with so many of my teammates at Newcastle United. And our motivations at the time were, well, we were trying to make a better world, a better community for our kids to grow up in. And now, just as a father, in recognizing that I broke that promise to my kids. I can't say that. I can't honestly say that I've delivered on that promise to my kids. Just from a parental perspective, that's also tough. A tough admission to make to myself, and tough to have to look my kids in the eye and tell them sorry that I didn't deliver on that promise that I made 25 years ago. But now they have found the impetus themselves to be front and center to those discussions, to be front and center with those difficult conversations with many of our friends and many of our teammates or ex-teammates and those people around us. And I'm enheartened by that more so than anything else.
The movie Selma, and please correct me if I get any of the details wrong here, but that feels like a very fitting time for that to have been on television, because that's about it's the voting rights march, isn't it, from Selma to
Correct.
Montgomery, yeah, in the 60s, and obviously Martin Luther King was heavily involved in that.
Yes.
And you talk about the promises that you made. That there's obviously still time. There is still time for your generation to have a huge impact. And when you look at the marches that have been happening now, and there will have been plenty all over the place. There'll be marches everywhere, and we've seen so many of the pictures on television. Has it occurred to you to take part in one that itself is a difficult conversation right now because of coronavirus?
Yeah, I have. My wife and I went into Boston. We live just outside Boston. And we went into Boston a few nights ago and joined in the march. And, well, just to correct you, I'm not sure how much time my generation has because I'm running out a runway quickly here, Steve. But the one thing I recognized in going to that march and why I felt so much better for it is as I looked around at the participants, and you appreciate the demographic of it. Young people made up of every single ethnicity under the sun, all joining in chorus for Black Lives and singing Black Lives Matter. And that for me was the most refreshing thing, the most refreshing of experiences that I could have hoped for. And now I am happy in seeing that. I'm happy to see that maybe the time has come for our generation to step away from the front lines. It is now in the hands of the young people who understand the fight now better than any of us from my generation, who understand the force and the power of social media, of how to mobilize, of effective protest. And now it's left to people like myself and my wife to join in those marches, add our wind to their sails in supporting what they are doing, because I feel they have better ideas. They know what they're doing. They know today's world better than we do. We have to support, and it's in great hands.
You said, Shaka, that in the very early days, immediately after the death of George Floyd, that you went through the full gamut of emotions. So when you were there at that march, what was the emotion that you were feeling most keenly? Was it hope?
Well, given the progress or lack thereof that we've made since let's say from the last 25 years since we founded Show Racism the Red Card back in my days up in the Northeast, you accept that this is a very long road to go. And then you put that in the backdrop, in the perspective of Selma as we're now talking about, and how difficult it has been in those years. And now you see them and you understand that there's still a long way to go yet. But like I say, it's in good hands. And it was a difficult decision, just kind of given the global pandemic and the threats that throws up, the barriers that throws up, for us to go. We've got young kids, and my mother-in-law lives in the U.S. and we want to visit her at some point soon, and we have to keep those things in mind. Yet I'm so glad that we made the difficult decision to go join in, because it's left us with a renewed sense of hope, a renewed sense of that maybe we will get there, whether it's in my lifetime or not. But we're on our way.
The question that's being asked a lot at the moment, after what happened to George Floyd is, will this be a tipping point? And, you know, if you go back in history, tragically, there are scores of incidents, there are scores of wholly avoidable deaths prior to this one where we might have asked the same question: could this be a tipping point? So to you, does this moment feel different? Does it feel like it could be a moment?
It does. It feels a whole lot different than anything I've experienced in my lifetime. And no, you're right. It's not the first time that we're seeing black men lose their lives at the hands of the police. But as you look at what's happened over the course of this calendar year, and you just start to wonder if it's a perfect storm in terms of forcing the narrative and forcing us all to have those discussions. From the murder of Ahmaud Arbery at the hand of vigilantes out for a jog, to Christian Cooper having the police calling him because he had the nerve to ask a white lady to follow what was the law and what was the rules that were posted in Central Park, to Breonna Taylor losing her life with one of these no-knock raids in her own house, to Botham Jean being gunned down while sitting on his own sofa in his own apartment. All that with the backdrop of white people taking assault weapons to state houses to demand haircuts. And now all of a sudden you realize, but hold on, if it's okay for you to arm yourself with AR-15s because you're tired of being in the house with a global pandemic, then why is it being frowned on when Colin Kaepernick kneels to demand racial equity, to demand that law enforcement see us all in the same light? And I feel all those things coming together has brought us to this point and made everybody sit up and realize the disparities and the inequities that black people have been talking about for what feels like since time began.
For this to be an important moment, it obviously has to be taken forward in the right way. And when you look at some of the things that happened on social media, I think it's very interesting when you see the NFL's social media accounts and the San Francisco 49ers social media accounts showing their support for Black Lives Matter, whilst at the same time, we didn't see any of that support for Colin Kaepernick when he was taking a knee.
Exactly. And that for me, you're right to raise that point, because I saw it and couldn't believe it. And then to counter that, as much negative conversation there has been around the looting and some of the violence that's gone with these protests, you can't tell me that hasn't forced the issue. You can't tell me that hasn't forced people who otherwise wouldn't have taken notice to sit up and pay very careful attention. And the NFL, you're right, because I saw the NFL statement and read it over in total disbelief. We were only 4 years removed from people being in the parking lots of American football stadiums this country over, lynching effigies of Colin Kaepernick. And yet, the same people who, I don't want to say promoted it, but certainly they played a part in that and didn't do enough to distance themselves from it at the time, and now all of a sudden huge proponents. And I can't help but see the hypocrisy to it.
It's important, obviously, to hear from big names and big voices in sport for a number of reasons, but I imagine one of the biggest ones is, let's take somebody like LeBron James. Mm-hmm. There will be people who love LeBron James as a basketball player, but might have completely unacceptable views on race. However, if you love LeBron James and you watch him saying something, maybe that message permeates better coming from him than it would coming from, say, a politician.
Absolutely. I think as people in the public eye, we all have a responsibility, first and foremost, and most simply to our communities. That's why, again, going back to the start of show recently, Red Card, I remember being joined by Warren Barton, Les Ferdinand, John Beresford, among countless others. And our feeling then was going around to schools in the Northeast because we had a responsibility to our communities. And now, show recently, Red Card has become this nationwide organization that has an outsized impact, and outsized from anything we ever imagined at the day. Similarly, in today's world, as much as LeBron James may first be thinking about his own communities, be it Cleveland, where he's initially from and where he grew up, spent his childhood, to now LA, where he currently plays his basketball, you have a platform to affect those communities. And when, regardless of who this basketballer may be, and when you're as big a name, as big a personality as LeBron James, that platform extends so much further. And I think those messages resonate so much more when they come from people like LeBron James, people who have so much to sacrifice and yet are willing to put it all on the line to get that message across. And I have always been a huge fan of LeBron James on and off the court. And my respect and admiration continues to grow as he continues to use his platform for the movement of social justice.
I mentioned LeBron actually for a specific reason. And, if we were to go back to the 1960s, we could talk about people like Reuben Carter, who would say that he was basically railroaded by the police because of the fact that he was outspoken, and he was basically given the message, you should be happy to be being on the pedestal you are. Don't get into politics. You just shut up and do what you do. LeBron James was talking about George Floyd recently, and there was a quite a famous social media clip now of a TV news anchor saying that he should shut up and dribble, and in the same breath almost saying that Drew Brees, a white American quarterback, is entirely entitled to give his opinion. So is it a concern for you, the way that the media treats this, that even if LeBron James speaks with passion, that sometimes that message can be distorted?
Well, just to put that in perspective, Steve, that the news anchor you're talking about is a lady by the name of Laura Ingraham, who works with Fox News, and they are not shy about their own biases on that network. Mm-hmm. So to hear it coming from Laura Ingraham and to hear it coming on that network didn't really surprise anyone. But it highlights the disparity in the expectation from Fox News, if nobody else. And not just, I know the exact clip that you're talking about, but if you look at Laura Ingram's, well, both quotes in more detail, in talking about Drew Brees, she's saying, well, he's human, he has an opinion, isn't he allowed to express it? This is America. Yet a few years ago, as you rightly point out, she's saying to LeBron James and Kevin Durant, don't have an opinion, shut up and dribble. The underlying sentiment to that being, well, aren't they also human? Aren't they also entitled by their humanness to have an opinion? And I think that speaks to who Laura Ingraham is, and more widely to the issue. This is not just about athletes, black and white, having an opinion or not, but it's a perception about athletes, black or white, and the level of their humanity.
So that attitude that existed decades ago and exists in some places today, that some people would say that a black athlete should just concentrate on their sport and they wouldn't say the same to a white athlete. Do you think that is restricted to certain parts of the media, or is it still an opinion held by a dangerously significant number of people?
I think it's still an opinion held by a dangerously significant number of people. But I think there are enough outlets, both traditional and new, with social media and etc. that are now available to so many people, that people can get their messages out. They don't have to rely on traditional forms of media. And more you're seeing athletes appreciate their platform and use their platforms for the good of their communities, for the good of the nation, for the good of humanity. And in talking about basketball and in talking about using those platforms and great basketball players, we are now a long way removed from the attitude of they're Republican, they buy shoes too, which we heard from Michael Jordan. Now, don't get me wrong. I love and appreciate Michael Jordan as a basketball player. And don't get me started in that debate about greatest ever. But he failed in his responsibility to his community with that statement. That, for me, and what he said, and as much as in the recent documentary, he's trying to portray it as he said it kind of off the cuff and tongue in cheek. It spoke to more about the value of the economy, of economics, of the financial over life, over human rights. And I make that point today for one specific reason, Steve. Here in the US, we just had the new jobs report come out. The economy has added something like 2.5 million jobs here in the US. And I fully expect that over the next few days, all the discourse will be about the rebound of the economy and less about the value of life. Because once again, you may see the economics of the day be put ahead of people's lives.
So, and I appreciate this is an incredibly broad question. If we're saying that the tragedy of George Floyd can be a moment, and as you said yourself, it feels very different to anything else in your lifetime, what has to happen now? What do you think is the next step to make it something which can hold for the next generation, important, to be an important symbol of something?
I think you need to have current administrators, politicians, be it governors and mayors, the heads of the police service, sit and have those discussions with community leaders about what's needed and then what's expected from the communities in response. I think for far too long, those discussions have been one way. It's been about the politicians and the political hierarchy telling the communities, this is what we're going to do and this is what we expect of you. I think those conversations now need to be two-way streets. And we both have to hold each other accountable. But similarly, you have to see a unity in that approach. And that can only come after everybody's invited to sit around the table for meaningful discussions and meaningful path forward plotted that will be adhered to.
That's the voice of Shaka Hislop with us on the guest list on 5 Live. Let's talk about Show Racism the Red Card now as well, because having spoken so much about what life is like in America, how do you feel we are? What sort of position are we in right now in the UK, do you think?
I honestly don't think it's that dissimilar from what has happened here in the US. And now, as much as I said it's not dissimilar, there are quite clearly differences. One in particular, the African population started arriving in the US just over 400 years ago, 1690, through the slave trade, albeit under British rule. And the US has always had a very significant black population here in the US since. Now, that black population has gone through any myriad of acceptances, which we've discussed. The difference with the UK is, I think you saw a major influx of black people to British soil in the 60s and 70s, post World War II, with the Windrush generation, as they're now popularly referred to. And whereas English had their colonies and had their slave holdings all over the world, the vast majority was not on British soil, current British, in today's Britain. So that's a newer dynamic to it. I also think that there was value to the Brixton riots and recognizing that in recognizing black people's rights and their willingness to make their voices be heard. Now that moved the conversation forward. There's still a lot more conversation and a lot more progress to be made, which we will continue to make efforts toward. What I think it also highlights is that progress is a slow moving machine. And every now and then you have these incidents, whether it's the protests and riots that we're seeing today, or whether it's the Brixton riots that are just mentioned in England, that gives us these steep increases in recognition, that provokes meaningful gains. And that's what we're witnessing here today.
I read earlier today an interview that Raheem Sterling did with Megan Rapinoe actually recently, and within that interview he said that he is looking at the prospect of becoming an anti-racism ambassador, and he's been working with the Premier League. And sadly, Raheem Sterling, as everyone I'm sure will remember, has been the victim of racist abuse within a football stadium in England all too recently. How powerful do you think his message can be?
Absolutely powerful. I think the beauty of Raheem Sterling is the way he uses his platform, the non-confrontational way that he highlights the differences and discrepancies in black and white players and their treatment, not just by fans or a small minority, but by mainstream media right there in the UK. And he does it so very effectively. And he's a very likable and very endearing person. He's the full package in terms of moving these discussions ahead. Similarly, Megan Rapinoe, who was also taking a knee during her time and forced the US Soccer Federation to pass down their own kind of ruling that you couldn't kneel during the anthem, and now they are backtracking and trying to figure out how they can do right by their communities of players and fans alike. Similarly, she does so with such good effect. And again, as I step back from the programs that I've been involved in, the work that I've done in the past, and you see this new generation and what they're doing and how they're doing it and how much better they seem to be at it, it does fill you with hope and a little bit of paternal pride, if I can say so myself.
And to finish with then, it's very easy for me to talk about this and talk about what's happening in America when we have so much of an issue with it on our own doorstep. And, you know, that I think the general consensus is, sadly, that racist incidents within football have been on the rise for a significant amount of time now, which obviously makes the message of players like Raheem Sterling all the more important. Do you think that is right, that there has been, things are worse now and have been worse in recent years than, for example, in the noughties?
Let me say, I remember the days of John Barnes and Viv Anderson and SRtRC's. Those are the players I grew up watching and witnessing the treatment that was meted out to them and appreciating during every single minute of my own career how much I owe to those players. Things right now are a whole lot better than they were when I was looking at those players coming up and during the peaks of their own careers. But I always felt that football stadiums reflect what's happening in today's society. That what you're seeing in terms of the abuse is only the tip of the iceberg as to what black players and black people face in everyday society. I also feel that football can lead and should lead from the front because of the similarities between what we witness every day and what becomes our homes on match days and general society, and the diversity that comes with the dressing rooms in today's football. We similarly need to lead. I won't say that things are getting worse, but I think in many respects, it's getting louder. And you also have to recognize that the time of the silent majority needs to be over. It's no longer good enough to sit by, hear racist chanting, and be comfortable in, well, I didn't participate, so I'm okay. You now have to speak up about it. You now have to make your own voice heard in countering that, in raising the issue with authorities and taking action. Football at its highest levels also have their responsibility. Still, as we speak today, you are far more likely to get a hefty fine for financial fair play disputes than you are for having racist chanting in your stadiums. Our football leadership has to do a better job in addressing those discrepancies as well.
Shaka, it's been such a pleasure talking to you. Thank you so much for coming on and speaking to us. Really, really appreciate it.